Hi and welcome to One Simple Recipe, where I am really excited to bring you this recipe. These are the famous viral TikTok 3-ingredient cottage cheese bagels, and they really work. I was very surprised. Did not think they would, and they're awesome. So we're going to make those today. I'll bring those back over and we'll share what I did. A few tips were some of the ones that I just made ahead of time, but we're going to go ahead and get these together. I'm Judy Matusky. I'm a registered dietitian with Athens Nutrition, so it's good to be here. We're going to put these incredible bagels together, and I think you're going to want to make this recipe too. All right, so first things first, cottage cheese. So that is the food darling of the moment. It's kind of funny to me because cottage cheese has been around forever, and most people, never really wanted to eat it. Now it's really famous again. So there are different types of cottage cheese. I just happened to grab one at Trader Joe's. I prefer the low fat. As you know, I'm sort of more low fat dairy, just for heart health. But this is a small curd cottage cheese, and there is a little bit of a difference. If you're not sure about the curds in cottage cheese, if that sort of is what's sort of swaying you for not wanting to use it, you can get small curd or large curd. And small curd might be better for you if you're not sure about cottage cheese. So anyway, the only thing about cottage cheese is that, and this is something I just learned, I was under the assumption that all cottage cheese is a cultured dairy like yogurt and contains probiotics, but it depends on the brand. So this particular one from Trader Joe's, from what I can tell, because there's nothing on this label that says it contains live bacteria or live cultures, I don't think it does, and many don't. The Daisy brand that I picked up, this one does, so that's great. So this would be a good one that I would recommend. I think Good Culture is another one that has the live bacteria, the cultures in it, which is what we want for gut health. And so not only is it a great source of protein and some calcium, but we also would love to be able to get that cultured dairy so that we're going to get some of those probiotics. So keep that in mind when you're choosing your brand of cottage cheese. All right, the one thing that we're going to have to do is we are going to have to whip the cottage cheese. I'm just using this like mini food processor. You could do this in a blender. I'm going to talk a little bit about and show you in a minute here some of the bagels that I had made, because I tried them in a couple of different ways. Just I was curious to see how things would work. So I realized that you do really need to whip the cottage cheese. I feel like that gave the best rise and the best texture, in my opinion, for these bagels. You can just add the cottage cheese without whipping it. I felt like it just turned it was a little bit of a drier bagel than when you whip it, because this is going to be a little creamier texture. So give me a second here to do this. It just takes like literally a minute here. I'm just going to whip it down. You don't have to get it super creamy. The idea is just to kind of break up that cottage cheese a little bit. So that's our whipped cottage cheese. Now you can keep going if you want to make it even smoother. That's fine. It's not gonna really matter if there's a few little chunks in it. But just as a side, this whipped cottage cheese, this is what is whipped cottage cheese. So if you want cottage cheese and use it as like a sour cream substitute, this is what you want to do. Whip it up, get it nice and smooth, and you can use it like you would pretty much like sour cream or even like a whipped cream cheese in a lot of recipes. But again, more protein, but in a little bit less saturated fat. So that's always a good thing. All right, so let's just get this out of here. Just kind of need a medium bowl. I'm just gonna shake off some of the cottage cheese that's kind of around the blades there. All right, and then we're just gonna dump this into the bowl. This is a cup of cottage cheese. Now, I did make this, like I said, I made this without whipping it. I made these bagels without whipping it. And I also made these bagels with Greek yogurt, which everyone is saying on TikTok that you can substitute Greek yogurt. And you definitely can. And I think they're fine. They're a little easier. You don't have to go through the step here of actually whipping the cottage cheese, but let me just show you a couple quick things. So I don't know if you can actually tell, but maybe you can. This bagel with the sesame seeds, this was done with the whipped cottage cheese. And I don't know if you can tell, but it's a little bit thicker than this one. that here's the yogurt. This one I made with Greek yogurt, still tastes great, but it didn't rise quite as much. And then this is the one that I used with the cottage cheese without whipping it. It's fine. It's just that it's a little more craggly, and I felt like the dough was just a little bit drier. You can certainly do all three. They're fine. My preference is to whip it. I feel like you get something that looks a little bit more like a bagel. Now these I had in the freezer, so I made these the other day and I froze them, which is great. They works fine. If you want to kind of crisp them back up again, you could do one of two things. Obviously, put them in the toaster, slice them and put them in the toaster, or you could just pop them back in the oven, for like a few minutes or 5 minutes, just to kind of crisp them back up, because when you first bake them, they're really crispy and then they're really soft in the inside. But I would have, because these are frozen, and I just defrosted those. Now these other ones that you can see here on the side, these were cinnamon sugar bagels. So I did just plain sesame seeds on the one side, and then the three of them, and then I made a double batch. So they made 4, but I had given 2 away. So these are the cinnamon sugar ones. Okay. So let me just put this to the side. We'll talk about that in a little bit. All right. So now, next step here is the 3-ingredient bagel is cottage cheese, self-rising flour, and cottage cheese and self-rising flour, really, basically, that's pretty much it, I think. But I don't have self-rising flour. I guess you can add salt to that, but I don't have self-rising flour, and I don't use it. Self-rising flour is basically just regular flour with baking powder and salt added. So I don't have it, so I'm not going to use it. I'm just using regular all-purpose, although because I like to get whole grain into all of my recipes, just obviously from a nutritional standpoint, I'm using half whole grain flour, so half a cup of whole grain flour, and then I'm just using a half of a cup of all-purpose flour, just to give it a little bit more whole grain. The recipe calls for just 100% all-purpose flour, but you can certainly swap it out. I haven't tried 100% whole grain. The problem with whole grain flours is they can dry things out a little bit, so you need a little more moisture when you're cooking with whole grain. So anyway, so that's our flour. We have our cup of cottage cheese. We have our flour. Now I'm going to add 2 teaspoons of baking powder. This is going to be our leavening agent here. And again, if you're using self-rising flour, which is some of the recipes call for that, you don't have to add the baking powder. And then I'm just going to add between a quarter of a teaspoon and half a teaspoon of salt. All right. And that is it. So we have our flours. I used whole wheat and white flour. We have the cottage cheese, baking powder, and the salt. Now, we're just going to mix this together. And this is going to form, what you could do, which would even be better, is if you put your flour and your baking powder and your salt in the bowl first, then you can kind of make sure that all those 3 ingredients blend together really well before you add your cottage cheese. But I did not do that. But anyway, and then it seems like it's not going to come together because it is. I like the word craggly, and that's just kind of what it is. Kind of reminds me of when you're making Irish soda bread. I feel like it kind of looks the same way sometimes. It seems like it's a little dry, but believe me, it'll come together. Now, Bethany Frankel is probably the one that really made these bagels a little more famous, particularly on TikTok. Her recipe is a little different. I think she uses 1 1/4 cups of cottage cheese, but I'm just going to move this to the side here for a minute. I haven't done it that way. I just used the 1 cup cottage cheese to 1 cup of flour. That seems to work out fine. Now they are going to be a little bit sticky, so I'm trying to get the bottom of the drier flour that's on the bottom. It's even easier to probably just dump this out onto the surface. So you do want to use a little bit of flour. You don't need a lot of extra flour, but it helps because it is a little sticky in the beginning until you're kind of getting it together. So just kind of dump it all out on here. And you do want to knead it a little bit. So just kind of bring it together. And, again, it is, there's gluten in this flour. So it's kind of like any bread or bagels. You're going to want to develop that gluten just a little bit. If you're making these gluten-free, my suggestion would be to use an all-purpose kind of gluten-free flour blend. I haven't tried it, but I've read that they don't really, and you're just going to kind of want to move this around just until you're kind of incorporating all of the flour in here. And again, it's a little bit sticky, but once you get it going, once you start kneading it a little bit, it comes together. All right, because the cottage cheese starts to, the moisture of the cottage cheese kind of works into the flour. I don't know. I'm not sure if almond flour or any of these other kinds of gluten-free flours would work. I think I would stick with a gluten-free, just a gluten-free all-purpose flour mix. All right, so now get these together. So we're just trying to turn this into a ball. This only makes 4 bagels, but if you want to, which I've done, just double it. If you want to get 8, just double everything. So you can usually get 8 bagels for sure. And they freeze really well. So if you have everything out, and if you have enough cottage cheese, you might as well just make as many as you want. So you have them for whenever you need them. And what I like about these bagels from a nutritional perspective is that it's nice because bagels sometimes are just so carbohydrate heavy, especially for something in the morning. So this is really nice because it does balance it out. It really brings the carbohydrate grams down, and it really ups the protein. So it's anywhere between, I think, 10 and 12 grams of protein per bagel, and only around 150 calories, give or take, which is actually really good. And then if you even are adding like an egg to this or anything, that's great too, or you don't even have to, or you just add some peanut butter. So now I'm just using a bench scraper, or you can just, a knife. I just have this. And then I'm cutting it into pretty much equal portions. So we're trying to get just four little pieces that are pretty equal in size. They don't have to be exactly equal. Some of the recipes say you can weigh them, but I think the point of this recipe is it's supposed to be super easy. I don't think you need to be getting out your scale to do this. All right, so you're going to just you're just taking each little rectangle here. Actually triangle, get my shapes right. And then now we're just going to roll it out. So it's nice because my little bench scraper is a 6-inch blade here, 6 inches. And you're kind of rolling them out into about 6 or 7 inches. Doesn't really matter that much. You're just trying to get them into a little bit of a rope so that you can turn them and you can make a circle out of them so that they come together I'm going to move some of this flour off here, as a bagel. That's all we're doing. And sometimes, I found that sometimes when I'm doing this, the dough might seem a little dry or it doesn't hold together as well, and then sometimes it seems a little wet. I think it just depends, because I'm not weighing my flour, I'm just going by cup size. So this is about a 6-inch rope that I made, and you can make them a little bit thinner. It just depends on how much of a hole you want in the middle. Now, and then you're going to just pinch the edges together. If you have a little too much flour, which I do for this one, it might be hard to kind of get them to come together, but as best you can, you're just sort of shaping that into a bagel, okay? And it'll rise together even if they're not stuck. So here you have this starts out like this with this amount of a hole in the middle, but once it bakes, it is going to close up that hole. I think if you rolled the rope out a little bit thinner, you would get, so you can see mine, that closed. It does close up, but you can see that there's supposed to be a hole. Now this was the yogurt bagel. That one's maintained a little bit of a hole. But the thinner you make that rope, the more of a hole you'll probably be able to maintain if you want that. Doesn't really matter. All right. So again, we're just rolling these out. And if you see little flecks of cottage cheese, which I do, because I didn't whip my cottage cheese super creamy. There were a little bit of pieces of the cottage cheese still in there, which is fine. You're not going to really see them. Once it bakes up, you're really not going to see the chunks in there of the cottage cheese. All right. I'm just trying to make them as even as possible so that one side isn't really thin and the other side's thicker, just so they bake evenly. All right, so again, these can be a super easy addition for your, obviously any meal. I think they would make an awesome snack too. And I've toasted them from frozen. You can eat them. They stay pretty well just after you bake them for a couple of days, just at room temperature. You don't have to really do anything with them. But I think toasting them is always great, because I feel like when you toast anything, it just makes the flavor a little bit better. Or you can just warm them in the oven if you'd like to do that, or you can pop them in the microwave. My goodness, it's whatever you want to do. All right, we're into the last one. Now I'm just going to bring that together. So you can kind of see, we're just rolling it, bringing the two ends together. Now, a friend of mine said she saw that you can make like pretzel nuggets out of this. I was like, great idea. So you would just you probably do this and roll them out and then just cut them into little nuggets and bake them that way. I haven't tried that yet, but why not? All right, now, let me just clear off this. Let me just clear off this counter a little bit. Bench scraper. Sometimes using it as the term indicates. It's great for just kind of scraping off your counter. All right, putting that to the side. And now I'm just going to try to get some of this flour off of my hands. All right, now, we're going to, the final step here, which is super important. This is one you do not want to skip. All right, so here's our 4 bagels. Ready? This is the step you do not want to skip, because it absolutely makes these bagels brown, and it also gives it that crunchy exterior. So I have an egg in here, and I just a pinch of salt. Apparently that's supposed to help break up the whites when you're trying to make an egg wash. I guess you could use a little bit of water, but I didn't want to do that. And then you just want to make sure you beat that really well, so you can kind of incorporate that white into the yolk, so you're not getting stringy whites. And now you're going to just take a pastry brush and then just brush the top. And it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how much you put on here. You really want to coat it, both the inside of that hole and then around the edges. And if a little egg gets on the parchment, that's fine. It's actually kind of good when the toppings sort of get caught into the egg wash that's sitting on the parchment paper, and it kind of crisps up, and it actually tastes really nice. But anyway, so really paint the egg wash on. Try to get all of it, so that when you put your toppings on, they'll stick. All right, so kind of getting down into the middle. And then the toppings of your choice. I don't have everything that, I'm probably the only person in the world that's not the biggest fan of everything bagels. That is not one that I really love. So I do not have the everything but the bagel seasoning. All right, so you have a fair amount of the egg wash left, but when I did 8 bagels, you pretty much used it up. I'll just save this and I'll just use it for making some scrambled eggs or something later. All right, so I have just some toasted sesame seeds, which is what I did on the ones that I made the other day. I'm just going to put a lot of, the more the better for me. I love sesame seeds, but you could use sesame seeds. You could use that everything bagel. I use the tar on some that I've made. That's just it's kind of like a thyme and sesame seasoning. You could do that. I also made up a cinnamon sugar mixture here that I think is really good. So if you kind of want it like a little bit of a sweeter bagel, these are kind of nice. You don't really, when you make these, you don't even have to add anything to them. I mean, just eat them just like this. It's like a cute, nice little sweet treat. So I'll do 2 cinnamon sugar, and it's okay if your toppings fall in the middle of your bagel, even better, because then as they kind of bake up, the topping that falls into the circle will kind of bake right into the bagel. All right, so here they are. So that's how they look once they're done. We have the sesame seeds and then the cinnamon sugar. And now 375-degree oven. You kind of want your rack at the top or upper third, of the oven. So that's what we're going to put it on. And then they take about 25 minutes. So they could take a little longer. Set it for, if you're not sure about your oven, set it for 20 minutes and check them. But I've noticed that with my oven, they do seem to take about 25 minutes. And then when they're out, they're going to look like this. Most of them will look like this because they'll be a little bit higher. I can even, let me just get my hands to my top a little bit more, but I can cut this for you. And show you the inside of this. Here's the inside of the there's the inside of the one with the whipped. You know what? I'll show you the other ones. That's the one with the whipped cream cheese. This one, the little more craggly one, this is what the inside, this one is definitely drier. I don't know. I wouldn't recommend using the cottage cheese without whipping it. I feel like it just makes it drier. And I can tell that the inside of this one is definitely a little bit drier than the whipped one. And then this one is that Greek yogurt where it did get a little bit flatter. I think it's just because the yogurt, there's a lot more moisture in yogurt than there is in cottage cheese. So maybe the extra water kind of that's in Greek yogurt. Unless you have a really thick Greek yogurt, then it probably would be better. But the crumb's nice, kind of similar to the, very similar to the whipped cottage cheese, but it just didn't rise as much. So if you're going to use Greek yogurt, I think probably the trick there is to use a really thick Greek yogurt, like the Fayet brand, which is nice and thick. The one I grabbed, that was definitely a little bit of a thinner Greek yogurt. I noticed when I was using it. So that might make the difference. So again, anyway, so if you want to use Greek yogurt, great. If you want to use the whipped cottage cheese, great. Both are offering great sources of protein and probiotics. I just don't think my recommendation is I wasn't crazy about just using the cottage cheese by itself without whipping it. All right, well, I hope you give these a try. Again, as adding lean proteins to your pantry, cottage cheese can be another lean protein. So it's great. You can use it for snacks. You can add it to toast. You can make bagels with it. You can add it into, you can whip it and then use it in dressings, in salad, in dips, in desserts. So even if you don't like cottage cheese as is, we were just talking about this with a friend of mine, with Paula, and we were out and we were saying we love cottage cheese, and my husband too, with apple butter. That was just like it's kind of a German thing, but you know, cottage cheese and apple butter is just something that I kind of grew up with, and it was great to have on toast. But also, just think about different ways to use cottage cheese. If you're not a big fan, just eating it right out of the container, just, you know, play with it. Because I think it's just a nice way to add, again, a little bit of protein. And if you can get the cultured variety, then you get the probiotics. All right, stay well till next week. We'll be back with another healthy pantry item that we'll be adding to your healthy pantry. Stay well. Bye-bye.